Access card for you.
So you have to start back before then.
Oh, yeah.
I think we can spread ourselves too thin by getting on.
Keep an eye on it.
All they talk about is tax season. You guys.
As a matter of fact, I just submitted my resignation on Monday. I have been asked to be at United Way. And I've been there about a year, and sometimes you just know when it's not a good fit. And so it doesn't make sense to stay.
That was a teacher.
Yeah.
I talked about all the
Mhm.
separation. So
Yeah.
right now she's 7, but she's got 3 kids, so. Trying to work in.
Yeah, but when I sense that I'm not making any purposeful,
Yeah.
then and if it's not.
Good afternoon.
It's
It's 4:30. And I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library Board of Trustees on today, July 21st, 2022. First order of business is to appoint a treasurer. Rick, would you be willing to act as treasurer for today?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much. And we do have forum for visitors. Any visitors present? I don't think so. I think it's all staff. And so we'll move on to correspondence. We do have a couple of items for correspondence for the board to review. I just want to point out that quite clever, we have received top marks, and I guess our top guns in U.S. passport and international travel service. So we are designated as, or the library is designated as a real maverick in that area. And then the other correspondence is regarding the Indiana Library and Historic Board found Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library in compliance with public library standards for 2021. And it's a letter of congratulation and acknowledgement from Jennifer Clifton from the state of Indiana and the Indiana State Library Association. So I'll pass those around for board members to review. Moving on, we have consent agenda is next. We have the minutes of the June meeting, personnel matters, the June PR report, and the director's report, and the monthly public service statistics. Do we have a motion to accept the consent agenda for today?
So moved.
So,
Do we have a second?
second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding consent agenda? Hearing none, we will accept those items as approved. The next item for business is governance. Lori, the appropriation reduction for the year.
I'll read the resolution and I'll explain it in very brief detail. Whereas it has been shown that certain existing appropriations encumbered in 2021 now have unobligated balances that will not be needed for the purposes for which appropriated, now therefore be it ordained by the Library Board of the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library of Vanderburgh County, Indiana, that the following existing appropriations be reduced by the following amounts. That is category 4, non-print materials by $216. And that's presented to the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library, read in full and adopted this 21st day of July 2022 with the following aye and nay votes. This was a larger purchase order that was put into place last year towards the end of the year for some materials in our non-print category. And the actual vendor who provided these materials gave us a discount. So we actually ended up paying less than what we encumbered for. And in those situations, we always have to, by law, move that money or reduce the money by that amount into the next budget year. So $216 was our savings, which is good, but we will have to reduce that particular line item at that dollar amount.
Do we have a motion to accept this reduction
So moved.
in a second?
Second.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
Mhm.
I didn't see you, Eric. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of accepting this library operating fund reduction, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And that passes. And Lori, I believe you need signatures. on
Yes,
that.
please.
All right, next on the agenda is the central parking garage and plaza repair and waterproof bid. Scott.
Okay, seems like we've probably been talking about this project, or you've been reading about it in the director's report for a long time. We did go out to bid to make the necessary repairs for the parking garage structure here at the Central Library. We received 3 bids back for this project. The first coming from Browning Chapman in the amount of $267,447. The second being Dyke Brothers coming back in the amount of $475,684. And Danco coming back in the amount of $513,353. Yesterday, we had a Buildings and Grounds Committee, and we discussed the bid comparison sheet that should have been included in your packet. And I believe it is the recommendation of the administrative staff and the Building and Grounds Committee to accept the low bid of Browning Chapman. They had a really nice bid, as did our other contractors, but they do extensive contracting work with parking garage structures, mainly in and around the Indianapolis area. And I have a feeling that is why they are able to keep their price down, because this is mainly what they do. And with that said, it'd be a savings to the taxpayers if that is the direction the board would like to go.
All right, do we have a motion to accept the recommendation of the proposal from Browning Chapman?
So moved.
A second,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the recommendation of Browning Chapman signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And motion carries. Next, bond legal counsel, Scott.
Yes, since our last meeting and during our last meeting, we wanted to get a little bit more information and history of our bond legal counsel, which is currently Ice Miller. They've been doing the work on our existing facilities plan to date. And the reason that this all happened is since the inception of the facilities plan, we had always talked about using Ice Miller as bond counsel and Baker and Tilly to get the information for this project to go forward through not only the full board, but the Building and Grounds Committee. And I've also been in communication with the board chair, but we never did bring this officially to the board by contract. And I do apologize for that, because that is my fault. I just assumed that was the way we wanted to go because of our previous conversations. Obviously, in the future, that will not happen again. And we will make sure that we give you more information to make a decision on that. But at this point, Ice Miller has performed about 90% of the work. But with that said, we did go out and solicit quotes from other vendors that may do bond counsel, and all of those bids came back very closely to what Ice Miller is charging there. In fact, they were in the mid-range, if not one of the lowest ones, but not the lowest person come back. But there was only 2 firms that actually did bond counsel with libraries particularly, and our bonds are a little bit different. And this goes back to some of the conversations also that we had with NKM, our architects who put our facilities plan together. I know when we talked to Zach, he said that's who he's only dealt with doing libraries in Indiana has been Ice Miller. So that was the rationale behind that, but I do understand all the concerns from the board, and obviously we will make sure that information comes to you again in the future.
All right. do we have a motion to accept Ice Miller as our bond legal counsel for immediate projects in the immediate future? Or any motion around it, if someone wants to restate that.
Before we make, or before I would entertain a motion, Scott, would you mind giving administration's viewpoint on what you're looking for the board to provide tonight with this?
What we would like to do, because we have two resolutions before you that we need to pass tonight that were actually produced by Ice Miller, we would like to basically have the board approve the use of our bond counsel at this time to be Ice Miller. Obviously, when we go for our next bond, we will RFP bond counsel and open it up further. But like I said, we did get quotes, and Ice Miller was right there with everyone's prices. And that price of that quote, in case anyone's interested, was $20,000 to $22,000, and they've already completed the work. It's probably going to end up being closer to that 20,000 figure would be my guess.
Is there a
Because they only
current
have two
quote
items
or
left.
contract? Is there a current quote or contract for this work?
It's been piece by piece billing
Yeah.
as it's been going. Is that correct, Lori?
They haven't billed us yet.
Yes.
They typically bill at the end
In,
of the bonding process, and that is actually covered by the
The bond
bonding
itself.
itself, yeah.
So we have the current
We don't
talk
have a current,
about the McCullough project, bonding
Yes.
from the McCullough project, and then a future larger possible bond.
Correct.
Are you looking to use Ice Miller for both of those projects? Looking for a motion for that?
At this time, we're just looking for McCullough, because based off of conversations we've had with the board to present, that's just come to light in the last month.
Yeah.
It's been recommended that we RFP for bond counsel going into our next bond, whenever that may be, hopefully next year.
That works. Then I would entertain, or I'd like to make a motion that we can continue to work with Ice Miller as our bond counsel on the current bond issue for McCullough project.
Do we have a second to that motion?
I will make a second for discussion purposes.
So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion.
So am I on mute? I can never tell. So,
We can hear you. We can hear you.
okay. So part of my concern here is, a lot of it looks like the cart's in front of the horse, so to speak, as we work through this process. I have no aversion to Ice Miller. In fact, we've worked with them in the past in different capacities, and they're a reputable firm and very capable. It's really not about that. It's making sure that I have, and that this board has full knowledge and understanding of the work at hand, the agreements that are in place, that we don't have, and I appreciate Scott's commentary, because I think he started to hit on it. That's kind of how we've been doing it. But, I had asked at the last meeting that we figure out a way, or we have an inventory of all of the agreements that we have out there, and that are of perpetuity, or that they don't have an end in it. We don't have a statement of work. We don't have, because I don't think as a governmental entity, we should have anything that is not reviewed on a very regular basis and approved by those of us that have been put in this position by our elected officials to represent the taxpayers and them. And I'm just telling you that it makes me uncomfortable that we're in this position right now.
And Eric understood, and that will happen in the future.
Any further discussion or comments? Are we ready to take to a vote then? All those in favor of retaining Ice Miller for the current McCullough bond project signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Since we're on the record, part of my vote in affirmation is to ensure that we don't stiff a vendor. You know, the vendor has already done the work. So I think it would be counterintuitive to say, I'm going to vote no on that one and we're not going to pay him or authorize payment. So I just think that needs to be out there.
Exactly why I made the motion, Eric. I agree
Okay.
with you. If they've already done this much of the work,
Yeah. And again, I don't have any doubt that they're not exceptionally capable, very well thought of, and probably the right firm to do it. I don't know. I didn't look at the paperwork and the selection process, but they have done the work. They have gotten it to this point, and there's no reason for us to contemplate we wouldn't pay them or we would engage somebody else on this part of the project at this point in time. Just my thoughts.
That makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, the preliminary bond resolution. Scott.
Okay, preliminary bond resolutions. I have forwarded to our board chair the preliminary bond resolution to read the resolution. This document was prepared by our bond counsel, Ice Miller, that has just been approved. And this is to establish our ability to go before the city council for bonding approval. Is the first resolution of two. The second will be the post-issuance compliance procedures, the resolution for that.
So I'll read Exhibit A, the bond resolution, and then we would need that in the form of a motion from
Correct.
a board member and a second from a board member in order to be able to discuss and vote. Whereas Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library, the issuer or library, is a library organized and existing under provisions of IC 3612-2. And whereas the Board of Trustees finds that the present facilities of the library are not adequate to provide the proper library services to present and future library patrons utilizing its facilities. And whereas the board finds that there are not sufficient funds available or provided for an existing tax levies with which to pay the total cost of the purchase of real estate and the renovation of and improvements to the McCullough branch, including site improvements and the purchase of equipment and technology, the project, and that the library should issue bonds in the maximum amount of $4 million for the purpose of providing funds to be applied on the project, and that bonds in such maximum amount should now be authorized. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of the issuer that for the purpose of obtaining funds to be applied on the cost of the project, there shall be issued and sold the general obligations of the library to be designated as general obligation bonds of 2022. Said bonds shall be in a principal amount not to exceed $4 million, bearing interest at a rate or rates not exceeding 5% per annum, the exact rate of rates to be determined by bidding, which interest shall be payable on January 15th and July 15th in each year. The bond shall be fully registered in the denomination of $5,000 or integral multiples thereof, or other denominations as requested by the winning bidder, and shall mature serially or be subject to mandatory redemption on January 15th and July 15th, beginning no earlier than July 15th, 2023, though no later than January 15th, 2030. The bond shall be redeemable on the dates and in the amounts as determined by the issuer. Be it further resolved that prior to the sale of said bonds, a public sale, notice of such sale shall be published once weekly for 2 weeks in the Evansville Courier and Press. The first of said publications to be at least 15 days prior to the date fixed for the sale of said bonds, and the last at least 3 days prior, and in the Indianapolis Business Journal. At the time fixed for the opening of bids, the board or its designated committee shall meet. All bids shall be opened in the presence of the board or such committee, and the award shall be made by the board or committee. Be it further resolved by the Board of Trustees of the issuer that the matter of appropriating the proceeds of the bonds authorized at this meeting can be taken up for consideration as soon as the notice of the hearing on said appropriation can be given as provided by law. and that the secretary of the board be and he therefore hereby is directed to give notice of the public hearing to be held prior to the final action on such appropriation, which notice shall be published in the Evansville Courier and Press at least 10 days prior to the date set for such public hearing. Be it further resolved that the secretary of the board be and hereby is directed to give notice of the determination to issue bonds, which notice shall be published twice, 1 week apart in the Evansville Courier and Press. Also, that said notice shall be posted in 3 public places in the library district. Do we have a motion to accept the preliminary bond resolution?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion regarding the preliminary bond resolution?
Yeah, I've got a quick question on the third paragraph where we say total cost of the purchase of real estate. I'm assuming that's just standard language, and because we never mentioned any purchase of real estate in the discussion prior to this. So that's just standard language.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, not being a lawyer, don't play one on TV either. This resolution, if passed, purely gives the library board the authority for the library to go talk to the city council and seek their approval. Is that
I'm
correct?
looking at our attorney nodding his head.
I'm gonna have to defer to bond counsel, but yes, I think that's right. So
I mean,
But
'cause
also,
it doesn't do anything for us to actually, we don't have the authority based on this to issue bonds or anything until we get city council consent.
that's
Correct.
exactly
Right.
right. That's
That is
right.
correct.
That is correct.
So,
But-
so this is just like the opening hand to go talk to them.
Correct.
well, I want to make sure that I'm hearing Eric right and that your answers in the affirmative are, because I think this resolution, our first step is to go to the city council. But if city council gives us approval, this resolution gives us the approval to, we're giving the approval to go ahead and issue bonds,
Correct.
right?
But the elected city council can stop it in its tracks.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
yes.
and that's why it is set up like that.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
I want to be clear. Yes, but there will be another resolution that comes to you in August. There will be 2 resolutions actually that come in August. That is really where you are approving the issuance of bonds. So technically, the city council can approve our additional appropriations and the board to move forward. You will have one more step at the August meeting to formally do the additional appropriations
Okay.
hearing.
After the bid for the
And-
bonds comes in,
There
you'll
will be
have the
another
exact amount, the
resolution
interest
for the
rate,
issuance of
everything.
bonds.
Yes.
But until the city council gives us permission, we don't get to that next step.
Correct.
But
Correct.
if the city council's consent and they say, yeah, we're all in favor of this, it makes sense, and McCullough, it's a good place to spend the money, it's deserving, go forward, then there's another resolution that this board then could weigh in and bring it to a halt if there's something faulty or the pricing or something else is wrong.
Correct.
Correct.
Is there not a third step though from the approval of the budget that has where we authorize the servicing of the bonds?
So once the resolution is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, if this goes through the city council, and it comes back and the board approves the resolution in the August meeting, then we have already projected what that will look like in the budget. So then the budget would go through the public hearing as normal in September, and we would do the adoption in October. But before that happens, we have to do the additional appropriation for 2022. The library does of the $4 million. Is that correct? Am I correct in saying that?
So there's a third possible step that if it does not complete, let's say somebody says they don't approve or they make a recommendation,
Mhm.
that could theoretically, just as for discussion purposes.
They kind of go hand in hand, so we'll bring both resolutions
Okay.
at the same
Okay.
time. So if one doesn't go through, then we wouldn't even vote on the second.
Correct. Okay.
On the appropriation, additional appropriation.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second to accept the preliminary bond resolution as put before you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion passed. All right, Scott, post-issuance compliance procedures.
And again, we have a second resolution for the post-issuance compliance procedures to be adopted by the board if you so choose. And we've already adopted the first half of this, but Dr. Stubbs is going to read the next resolution for us. So, which was in your packet, so it is read into the record.
So this is the resolution approving post-issuance compliance procedures. Whereas the Board of Trustees, the board of the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library, the library, has issued securities or has had securities issued on its behalf in the form of bonds, notes, or other types of indebtedness, the bonds, in order to finance or refinance various projects. And whereas by issuing the bonds, the library is obligated to comply with various restrictions and obligations which are described in the financing and closing documents executed in connection with the issuance of bonds, such as trust indentures, lease agreements, bond resolutions, tax certificates, arbitrage certificates, and master continuing disclosure undertakings, and which may extend for 20 years or more into the future. And whereas libraries experience administration changes over time, and it is in the library's interest to ensure the continuation and satisfaction of these obligations and restrictions. And whereas such restrictions and obligations require significant documentation, record keeping, and diligence. And whereas written procedures describing the monitoring, oversight, and fulfillment of these post-issuance obligations are beneficial to ensure maintenance of the tax exemption or other tax beneficial treatment on the bonds and compliance with Securities and Exchange Commission rules and regulations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board accepts and ratifies the post-issuance compliance procedures, the procedures presented to the meeting, and directs that these administrative procedures be incorporated into the procedure and policy manuals of the library administration. Be it further resolved that the board appoints the person who is employed as stewardship and governance officer to serve as the compliance officer as defined in attached procedures, and directs such compliance officer in consultation with counsel as appropriate to implement such procedures. Be it further resolved that the compliance officer is also directed to review any disclosure documents, such as an official statement or offering memorandum prepared on behalf of the library in connection with the issuance of any bonds issued hereafter, and such compliance officer is authorized to consult with any staff, financial advisor, or counsel to assist with such review. We have that in the form, and that is accompanied by the procedures. Do we have accepting that in the form of a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I do have some questions. One, I don't find the procedures on board docs. Am I missing them?
I sent them out by email.
Yeah, I did receive that, but I received that as a draft.
That's what,
That's how they'll be accepted.
Until they're adopted.
until they're adopted, yes.
Okay. So then they would just roll over as It's like a 15-page document. Roll
So
over it
what
there.
Belinda has is the resolution, and attached to that is that
You have it. It's
procedures.
just not on board docs.
Correct.
Okay. Or board book, sorry. Board
Sorry.
docs is EBSC. And also I wanted to point out, I mean, how wonderful it was to have story time with Belinda Stubbs. Dr. Stubbs. I hope you recorded it so everybody can experience it. I did want to ask, so a legal question. We say in here that we have issued securities or has had securities issued on its behalf. We haven't. Can we legally resolve,
We have had bonds issued,
but not for this project?
not on this project, no. But we've had other bonds issued.
So this resolution is not strictly in accord with the $4 million bond issue that will happen? It's just the wording trips me up a little bit.
What are you?
That it's a post activity.
But we haven't had the activity yet.
Correct.
Right, this is an anticipation, this post issuance, it's an anticipation of having those bonds issued, and these are the procedures for compliance and debarring those bonds. paying
And
those
so
bonds
as
off.
legal counsel, you have no concern legally with the board entering into or giving a resolution for
Basically,
something
we're
that has
just
not
saying-
yet occurred.
But we're just setting up procedures is basically what this document does.
Okay.
Before you can issue a loan, you gotta have certain procedures in place to ensure that everything is accurate. And, you know, we're gonna be signing all kinds of documents as we go along, as we issue the bonds. And after we issue the bonds, we have to make sure that we comply with what we, what we've done. There will be a lot of documents that you'll sign. And they'll have to be reviewed.
So Steve, is this like saying that, so this is the rules about issuing bonds for the library? And if we do the McCullough ones, we'll follow these rules. And if in 2 weeks we do one for some other project, we'd follow these same rules, that we wouldn't need to redo this again if there was another one. And it's just
I don't think-
hypothetical.
I think we're just putting procedures in place and Lori can, I think you've been in contact with Ice Miller, but basically this is just putting procedures in place to protect the process for issuing the bonds.
So
So
how
would
do
it
those
have been, would
different?
it have been less confusing if we'd have done this one first? Here's the rules we're gonna follow when we do this stuff.
Except that the procedures are for after you issue
Issue
the
the
bonds,
bonds.
not before you
but-
issue the bonds.
But we haven't issued any bonds.
So this just puts it in place so that once all the steps and processes are approved. If they're not, then we have a policy and procedures for future that we've implemented in the library. But if this particular bond would not get approved along the line at some point in time, then these basically for this particular project would be null and void. But
That
it
makes
helps
sense
set
to
us
me.
up.
But
So
if you
that-
say because of this particular project, these would be null and void, yet it makes no mention of this particular project in this document.
Correct, but it is tied directly to this one bond, which is why you did it after the preliminary bond resolution. You have to approve a preliminary bond resolution first. Then the post-issuance compliance procedures come next, even before you issue, because before you issue the bonds, you have to have something noting that we will be in compliance for the bonds to be issued. So that's the steps. I hear what you're saying, Eric, and I think if we move forward in the future with a $31 million bond, we can talk about putting specific language into compliance procedures. But in practice, if the entire preliminary bond resolution for that project, as stated, doesn't go forth, this is an exhibit within that, and this has nothing to. Does that make sense?
No, but I'll buy it.
So the other piece of this is, these are compliance with SEC
Yes. Basically, this is for the SEC.
Yes.
And also the laws that govern how bonds can be issued and what has to happen in the issuance process and after the issuance process.
So is administration and legal counsel, the way I'm hearing this is like this reads, whereas the Board of Trustees will have securities issued on their behalf. Is that how we're to interpret
We should say may have, I guess.
or may have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Properly.
So then I would be comfortable with that. The thing about what we'll do in the future, or will this apply? I'm sure this happened last time we issued bonds. Did we not do post-compliance procedures then? We adopted them way back then. Have they changed?
That's probably why they reissued this again, because it's been 20 years in case
Yeah.
there were changes in the.
Then I think they
and
should
the
really
entity.
tie
So
to a specific project. I mean, it would make it clearer.
My guess is when we go next year, whoever our bond counsel is going to give this document to us again, updated. with
The other thing
slightly
that
different language would be
Gives
my
me
guess,
a
lately.
little bit of, I don't say heartburn because I don't get heartburn easily, but we incorporate this into our procedure and policy manual. Did we do it before? So does this take if this is incorporated into our policy manual, was it incorporated into the policy manual the last time we issued bonds?
I would have to go back and look at the last time we issued a GO bond.
Okay, so the
Because the
last time we
last
issued
time-
bonds was.
The last
through the
time
lease
we
corp.
did this was for lease
Lease corp.
incorporation.
So,
And I'm sure it's part of their
Their
procedures and policies.
okay,
Further discussion or questions? A motion and a second. Not hearing any further discussion or questions. All those in favor of accepting the resolution approving post-issuance compliance procedures signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Resolution passes. Next, financial report, Julie.
For the month ending June 30th, in your packet is the monthly appropriation report, which shows a appropriation budget balance, if I can get to the right page. Of $9,250,521, or approximately 61% of our budget from the beginning of the year. And I will go into a little more detail during the second quarter mid-year point coming up in a couple of items.
Questions? All right, report of investments.
So for the June 30th, 2022 month end, we had a total for all four of our investment funds in Trust Indiana of $16,431,900. The average daily yield for June was 0.7914, or up almost 0.3% since May. And for the year-to-date average daily yield, it was 0.2892, up 700 since May.
Thank you. And next on the agenda, approval of bills, Mr. Cameron.
yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve the bills that are made up by total invoices of $1,932,938.19 and payroll June 3rd, 2022 in the amount of $263,501.74 and June 17th, 2022 in the amount of $392,676.19.
We have a motion to accept the bills. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, Lori, back to you.
So for the end of the first half of 2022 or second quarter end, you'll see that we have receded the tax settlement mid-June. So our revenues are looking positive at this point in time. I would point out that the columns on the far right side under revenue are under the budget order is what is actually approved by the DLGF at the state level. And the numbers that in those particular lines where we don't have a corresponding is because they are not included in part of our miscellaneous income. There's certain items that we lump together as well, and those are asterisks on the side. The one thing I would point out is our interest from investments. Because they were so low over the past year, we did decrease that estimated income at $5,000. So we've already exceeded that halfway through the year. So that's another positive, and hopefully those interest rates will continue to go up. For the expenditure side, we have a couple of line items that we're just keeping our eye on. They're running a little low on funds, but they are areas where we can easily move from other like category items such as our program supplies. We can utilize other general library supplies or office supply funding as we get to the bottom of that particular, or as we expend the majority of that line item. It's currently at 27% at mid-year. We also have experienced more usage with our outreach vehicles this year. So, and that was, we tried to estimate what that might look like in 2021 when we were budgeting for 2022, but not knowing exactly how many partners and or affiliates that we would have, and the new programs that they've initiated. Our auto supplies fleet fuel is 18% for the year, but again, it's a supply item that we can find allocations from other line items. And then on the second page under expenses, we have a 20% balance of our other audio materials, because audio books are very popular right now. Plus the price of them have gone up quite significantly. So each time we purchase a title through Overdrive, then we're having to expend more money to actually accommodate requests and hold where we have several holds on a particular title. But we also have the Hoopla accounts where you get charged per click or download on those.
Can you back
ahead.
up? Yeah, back up a second. You skipped over attorney fees. Is that Ice Miller roll into that?
No,
Okay.
but it's because Steve has been working with us on the bonding process.
Gotcha.
His fees will come out now for that, but then they are basically reimbursed when we go to do the bonding.
And any other outside counsel gets taken out of that, or is that
Yes.
strictly? Okay.
Yes, the Frost Todd Brown, I think it
Yep,
was.
saw that.
On the email.
That goes in.
Yes,
Okay.
that also applies to that particular line item. And then we just have a couple of preventive maintenance items for facilities that they show that they're down to 25 and 44%, but it's based on quarterly or semi-annual inspection process. So they're really not that out of alignment at this point in time.
Any other questions, Lauren? We'll move on to other business. Comprehensive financial plan presentation. I think everyone has a handout for that.
And with us today is Jason Tansel from Baker Tilly to go over the comprehensive financial plan update.
Rich, you give those away.
I'll go through and make sure you get the copies out. But thank you very much for having me at this afternoon's board meeting. Jason Tansel with Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors, and we represent the library as its municipal advisor. So We assist the library with financial projections, and what you have here this afternoon is a 5-year comprehensive financial plan that reviews the library's 5 funds that it has a budget for. And that is the library operating fund, the bond and interest redemption fund, the rainy day fund, the library improvement reserve fund, and the rainy day fund, or excuse me, the special Willard fund. That's so we have, hopefully, if you've been on the board for a few years, this report looks somewhat familiar to you. We have been preparing this report every 3 years since 2016, so this is our 3rd time presenting to EVPL board, and we appreciate the opportunity. But the report here really is a planning tool when we think about it. We don't have necessarily a crystal ball for the future, and so we are looking at 2 years of historical data with 3.5 years of projections through 2025. So we have used the resources available to us, the best information we have today, but obviously can't exactly predict the future. So this is a really good planning tool for evaluating where we've been and where trends potentially are headed. And you'll see within the report, EVPL does have very healthy reserves. So I would look at the comprehensive financial plan in that lens of the overall financial health of the library and where we may be seeing it going in the future. So with that, this is a 23-page report. And so I promise I will not go into every detail and every number. But I also appreciate questions along the way. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end. But I do want to start actually at the second to last page. We'll go over some assumptions on a high level. Page 21 and 22. This summarizes the assumptions that we have utilized for this CFP. And again, I won't go through all of these, but I did want to point out that as a part of projections, we have net assessed value projections, which impact future tax rates, and also max levy growth quotient projections, and that impacts our levies and circuit breaker tax credits. And so we utilize a company, Policy Analytics. They take a parcel by parcel data level look at this. So it's very detailed, but it's summarized here in the report. And so we had been working on this CFP since about March. And so I did want to point out there the 3rd box, growth quotient assumptions, in the middle of page 21. We have our assumptions there for the max levy growth quotient, which is how much the library can grow its levy or budget in any given year. And we assumed 4.5% for 2023. And of course, July 1, after our report was done, the DLGF came out and said that max levy growth quotient for 2023 is 5%. So it was too difficult to go back to Policy Analytics because it is such a detailed process, and the timeline, but the lead time would have been too long. I did want to point that out. That 4.5% is actual now, and it's 2023 for 2023, and it's 5%. Again, you can see our operating fund assumptions, our Willard fund assumptions, rainy day alert, and bond interest fund assumptions. And just looking at these briefly, we have looked at historical data from 2020 to 2021, and we have also utilized a percentage for miscellaneous revenues, which I heard Gloria talk about here briefly, and streamline those going forward. And so really that's the basis for this, for the receipts. On disbursements, we did assume that for the operating fund, disbursements grew by the max levy growth quotient, and that is not necessarily always the case, but looking at where the library has been historically, as Lori mentioned before, utilizing about 85% or so of the operating fund budget. So that is the basis for our disbursement assumption there. So with that, let's put you all the way back to page 3. Again, I realize there are a lot of numbers in this report, and it's a lot of information to take in, so please feel free to stop at any time. But page 3 is a summary of where we project the cash balance of each of the 5 funds given. And really, it's just an easier way on the eyes to see potentially where trends are going. And so you can see here that the library does have very healthy reserves with all funds combined. But that if you were to look maybe a little closer at the operating fund, potentially we see that operating fund having a very healthy balance of 8.7 million, dropping to 7.2 million. And so we'll talk about that once we get to each fund. But again, you can see similarly the Willard Fund starting at over $500,000, but potentially being in the red by the end of 2025. Rainy Day Fund, you can see growing. Same with the Library Improvement Reserve Fund. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Bond and Interest Redemption Fund and the reasoning why that is projected to also decrease. So just a nice summary on one slide where we have all the funds being discussed in total. And page 4 is a visual. Sometimes visual is a little bit easier than just numbers. These are all of the cash balances combined, and that is represented by the black line. But the green line represents the library's informal target of a 5-month operating balance. And so that's about 41%. So you can see, though, potentially, even if we have some declines in reserves projected, you're still well above the 41% that is the library's informal target. Slide 5. You might spend a little bit of time on this one since this is the library operating fund, but I will try to summarize these with high-level points because I know that I don't think we want to go through 54 line items there as far as our index to the far left, lines 1 through 54. So if I do call something out, I will also call out the number if that's a little easier for us. But here you can see, again, we'll start with receipts and the revenues, where we do project receipts to increase from 13.8 million last year to 14.8 million by the end of 2025. But also in the total disbursements, line 30, we are projecting disbursements to increase by that max levy growth quotient, 4.5%, 4%, and 4.1% each year. So that disbursement is also growing from 12.9 to 14.6. Going back to the operating receipts and the certified property tax levy, we are assuming that's growing at the max levy growth quotients. But really, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we have what's called on line 3, the levy shortfall or circuit breaker. And so when we look at that, just notice how, yes, the levy is increasing, but also circuit breaker is increasing with it. And this is just due to the taxpayer composition within Vanderburgh County and how there are a decent amount of taxpayers at the property tax caps. And so the circuit breaker tax credit is projected to increase as well. And we'll talk about that on some of the supplemental pages. We have projections out for those miscellaneous revenues, financial institution tax, lines 4 through 8, really 4 through 6, financial vehicle and commercial vehicle excise taxes. We have projected those out based upon historical trends. Also, a very large revenue source for the library is the local income tax, and we have flatlined that at 2021 levels. The remainder of those lines compose approximately $160,000 of revenues, so I won't go through them individually.
Can I stop you real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
What was the rationale behind flatlining the property tax?
The local income tax.
Oh,
That
it
is
was the
just,
local income tax you said?
yes, the local income. So we're looking at line 7 there, local income tax certified shares. The rationale is just that it's hard to project where the county's income taxes will be in 2025. We just figured, assumed that flatlining that at what it was historically in 2021 just might be the most conservative measure. The other revenues, as discussed, those are based upon historical trends. You see they match very closely to 2021, but again, we don't need to go into that detail. Operating disbursements have been broken out into 5 major categories, as you can see. And again, in total, that is growing by the max levy growth quotient, so 4.5%, 4%, and 4.1%. But the composition of those individual buckets is remaining the same. So 65% in personal services, 1.5% in supplies, 23% in services and charges, 9% in capital outlays, and then 1.5% in other. So that is just growing going forward. Under these assumptions, line 32, you can see every single year the library is still projected to have a net operating surplus. But I want to point out, this does not take into account the fact that historically the library has made transfers that it is allowed to make to Rainy Day and LIRF. So again, you can see in 2021, those transfers are over $1 million. And keeping that transfer amount the same, that begins to potentially chip away at that healthy reserve within the library operating fund. That $1,025,000 transfer, just for the board's awareness, is $750,000 to rainy day and $275,000 to alert. And we'll talk about those funds individually, but again, you can see if we continue to make that transfer, that cash balance does decrease to 7.2 million by the end of 2025.
Kenny, please come to the circulation desk. Kenny, please.
I thought maybe that was for a question. So also want to point out again, though, line 46, that is the operating balance within the library operating fund. The library is still projected to be above that 41%. So still very healthy reserves. And also pointing out line 49, the tax rate projection for this fund. The library operating fund, as we all know, comprises a majority of the library tax rate. The library's tax rate in 2022 was just under 21 cents, for example. So you can see this is 75% of that at 15 cents. And the projection is for that to actually increase slightly each year. As you can see, that grows from 15 cents to over 16 cents by 2025. The reasoning for this is because the projection for assessed value is not as high as the projection for that max levy growth quotient that the library is allowed to grow its levy. So when we think about the tax rate, it's levy divided by AV. And if your levy is growing higher than your projected assessed value, naturally that tax rate will tick upward. So I did want to point that out as far as AV projections are not estimated to keep up with the max levy growth quotient. And that is the reasoning for that slight tick upward annually for the operating fund, which has a little bit of impact on our circuit breaker up at the line 3. Any questions? Okay. Luckily, that was the slide with the most assumptions to really potentially talk through, but here on slide 6 is a little bit easier of a visual looking at those total receipts and disbursements, but I want to just point out these are operating receipts. This is an operating surplus. So before transfers, you can see the green bars, our receipts are higher than our gray bars, our disbursements. So projecting operating surpluses each year. But if we flip to slide 7, looking at total cash, if we continue to make over $1 million of transfers to lawyers and rainy day, as we talked about, that line graph trends somewhat downward to 7.2 million by 2025, but again, still above the informal target of 41% or 5 months of reserves. Any questions before I move on to Willard? Willard is a lot of the same assumptions, I would say, for the library operating fund. However, there is one large distinction that is different, and that is the fact that the maximum rate at Willard is 1.67 cents. So the levy that you see there on line 2 correlates with the tax rate on line 39 of 1.67 cents, depending upon the assessed value. So the levy is able to grow because assessed value is still projected to grow. It's just the fact that, again, the AV is not exactly projected to grow higher than max levy growth quotient. So really, the main takeaway I would have on Willard is the fact that total operating receipts are more or less flatlined at over 1,070,000 in 2022, all the way through 2025. And that's because by the amount we're able to increase the Willard levy, you can see circuit breaker is growing with it. That is the reasoning why that's flatlined. So if we make the same assumption and projection that Willard is able to grow operating disbursements by the max levy growth quotient, 4.5%, 4%, and 4.1%, those disbursements are continuing to increase, but revenues flatline. Thus, the reasoning for at the end of 2025, ending cash of negative $60,000. So potentially some adjustments in Willard to be looking at if revenue will be flatlined. Any questions on Willard? Big takeaway there, 1.67 cents is what we are capped at in Willard. The same graphs applied, slides 9 and 10.
Quick question. What do you define as personal services? When you operate in disbursements? Is that,
I don't think you actually have that defined, Lori, but
It's personnel.
Is that
and
personnel?
Benefits.
okay, it says personal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead of personnel.
Didn't know what that was. So the question there, it may be just a question of staffing issues and leaning out the operations.
assuming, yeah, if revenue is kind of flatline. Slides 9 and 10, again, green bars represent revenues, gray bars represent disbursements. You can see the gray bars are higher each year, which on slide 10 represents the declining cash balance, potentially below that 41%. Any questions on that? The next two funds, while different, are set up similarly in the fact that there's no property tax levy for rainy day, there's no property tax levy for clerks, there's no tax rate is associated with these funds. Their major sources of revenue are transfers from library operating. So you can see here, there are 0 operating receipts. However, on our non-operating receipts, line 14, you can see, line 16 transfers in from the operating fund of $750,000. So I'm looking at line 16 there, $750,000 into rainy day. And after having some conversations with Lori, you can see the assumption there for disbursements that is not growing by the max levy growth quotient. But historically, if you were to average 2020 and 2021, it's about $270,000 out of rainy day. So you can see the 325 out in 2022 and $275,000 dispersed each year thereafter. But of course, this would still generate an increase in the rainy day fund. You can see that balance increasing to 4.7 million in 2025 if these projections were to be carried forward.
What services and charges have we typically dispersed from rainy day?
It depends on the year. For instance, the parking garage repairs and waterproofing that was just approved tonight, that $267,000 will come out of rainy day. It was an emergency rainy day situation. We didn't budget for it. In some years, we've had other instances where issue or challenge came up with one of our facility, mostly in our facilities area, and we've used rainy day to pay for those particular repairs or whatever we needed. There have been years where we didn't have anything, but we also used it to help offset the circuit breaker tax credits. So we used it in previous years to 2020. I think 2019 was the last year that and it might have flowed into 2020. The expended part of it was we upgraded all of the control systems to the train intelligence services controls throughout all of our facilities for our HVAC units. When we've had planned a large HVAC upgrade, McCullough and Red Bank, we didn't have it in our operating fund. And with the circuit breaker tax credits, we were trying to utilize other funds. So we used rainy day to pay for those items as well.
You know, what the statutory reference on. Of what we can use rainy day for.
It's within we submitted, or we passed a resolution, I shouldn't say we, the EVPL board at the time that it was a rainy day fund was established, they approved a resolution on what it could be
Okay,
used
so
for.
it's not a statutory limitation on.
There are some limitations, but our policy and resolution,
That's what governs.
follows that, and there's not a lot of restrictions on what rainy day can be used for. Back in 2013, we actually borrowed from rainy day for our operating fund because until our tax settlement came in December to offset our expenditures early in the month. Then we just repaid it back into rainy day fund before the end of the year. That is statutory requirement that you repay if you borrow from like the rainy day fund.
On to slide 12, with looking at the library improvement reserve fund, again, a very similar setup as rainy day. It's funded strictly through transfers from the operating fund. You can see that assumption is $275,000. That's what it has been in 2020 and 2021. So transfer in there is line 16 once again. And you can see on operating disbursements, looking at LIRF and how that one, we could project the expenses to potentially grow by that max levy growth portion. But again, that really matches the funds coming in. It's more or less that LIRF is growing a little bit, but 1.8 million to just under $2 million by 2025. Before we move on into the bond interest redemption fund, Lori already mentioned it. As far as just looking at, there is one line item that I keep just skipping over. It's earnings on investments. And I would just say that our projections are that we know those are low, just given where interest rates obviously were much different a year ago than where they are today. So something that we would definitely recommend the library continue to just evaluate, making sure I know you utilize investments and hopefully that number is higher. So. Are there any questions before I move on into the bond and interest redemption? On the bond and interest redemption fund, I'd actually like to start with disbursements and just looking at those in total. Line 13, you can see that the library, with its debt service obligation, that is a general obligation bond. The second line item, other disbursements, that is the building corporation's lease rental payments. And so if you're wondering about the distinction between the two, that's what that is in reference to. But operating disbursements, as you can see, 3.7 million in 2020, 3.3 million in 2021, 2.9 million this year, and then an increase of 1.2 million projected for 2023. But then again, at the 24-25, back down closer to the historical levels of 2.9. The reasoning for this projection is the assumption is the library decides to move forward with a bond issuance this year. So that a 2022 bond hits the tax roll in 2023. All debt, as you can see, it would be repaid. Well, I guess you really can't tell that from this, excuse me, on this slide. We have another slide that summarizes it. But sorry, in short, all of the library's debt is maturing by 2023. And when the prior bonds were issued, the library was able to hold a 50% operating balance within the bond and interest redemption fund. So any bond that a municipality issued prior to 2014 was able to carry a 50% operating balance. And you can see that that is trending the right way. It makes sense if you were to look at the ending cash of 1.6 million on line 27, how that's just about half of that total operating disbursements in 2021. The same applies for the 1.4 million ending cash and how that is almost 50% of the disbursement in 2022. The law changed in 2014 so that if any bond issued after 2014 was issued and paid, that instead of carrying a 50% operating balance, entities are only able to carry 15%. So 50 to 15. So taking 15% of a $2.9 million payment would make cash reserves have to decrease to 400,000. And that is the reasoning why, if you were wondering, we're showing a net operating result of 1.1 million in 2023, The reasoning is that the library must be underneath $400,000 by 2023. And that is just the law that changed 8 years ago. That is the reasoning for that. But that's also the reasoning for the larger disbursement in that year, that $4.1 million payment. That $4.1 million payment is what will generate a levy that is in line with the 2022 levy number. And that was our target, was to not increase the tax rate. So now it's kind of in the weeds and the minutia, but if I was looking at this, I would have questioned that. So I want to make sure we talked about the reasoning behind the net operating disbursement there, result of 1.1 million.
So I missed this when I was reviewing it before. On 2022, on line 11, that should be on line 12.
It should.
And for 2023, then it should be on line 12, 1,474,500, and the difference on.
Right. The total amount is the same. The composition is slightly different, and that is our mistake there. Pointing out again the tax rate we're discussing here, line 31. I want to point out that really the library has given up debt service tax rate. And in 2020, you can see that the debt service tax rate was 4.5 cents. And that has declined to almost a penny less in 2022 at 3.77, but that in no year, so long as AV stays constant or potentially increases, that tax rate is not projected to increase above 2022 levels. And really, this is summarized slightly a little bit easier on slides 14 and 15, where this is a look at the library's already outstanding bonds and potential bonds that you are evaluating right now. Again, we talked about the fact all bonds are repaid by 2023. So looking at those 10, 11, and 13 bonds in the first 3 columns, those are all set to retire next year. And the library is in a place where we could potentially replace those payments without increasing that tax rate. Like we talked about, we do understand the potentially larger payment in 2023 of 4.1 million, but that you could see projecting under 2.9 thereafter. And looking at the next slide in summary for a visual, I understand that potentially there's a lot on this graph, but focusing on the bars, those are the already existing debt service payments in gray. The 2022 bonds, if approved, are in green, and the blue bars represent a potential issuance down the road in 2023 or later. And you can see there that the first line at the top, that's our estimated tax rate. So if you were to look at the far right axis, that rate is dropping from that 4.5 cents in 2020 to the 3.77 cents in 2022, but then staying at that rate thereafter. The dotted line represents that decrease in cash that will be required. So basically, the way we like to think of it is the fact that the library is keeping its rate constant, which is the goal, and you're not asking for more from your taxpayers, you're just using the funds you already have. Any questions? I realize it's somewhat dense. Try to make it a little light, but I know sometimes it's a lot. So. The next couple of slides are supplemental information that looking at slide 16, I think it's a nice summation of all the numbers we're talking about. How does it equate to a tax rate? And you can see this is a 10-year history of where the library's tax rate has been, and just want to commend the library for how constant it has been. You can see it's just over 20 cents almost every single year, and I don't believe there's been a year over 21. But again, you can see that operating fund almost every single year, it's ticking upward. It's that bottom data point there at operating starts at 11.91 cents in 2012. And with the exception of 2014, that rate has ticked upward, as you can tell. And that is just, again, we're talking about max levy growth quotient outpacing assessed value. Willard, 1.67 cents, 2019 and thereafter. So that is the same moving forward. And again, I just want to point out that the library has given up that service tax rate. Historically speaking, you can see it's in the 5 cent range, but now we're projecting that to be at the 3.7 cent range. Keeping that total tax rate, you can see it does increase slightly to the because of the operating fund, but around that 21 cent level.
I think I missed something if you said this, but on the Willard, was that fixed by
State law.
state law? Okay, that's what,
Litigation and do that.
okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
I'm actually, I wish I would have put 8 on the next slide. So skip slide 17 and go to 18 if you don't mind. And this is another summation of assessed value and how it's such a driver of tax rate. And just really thinking about where has the library been in 2009, excuse me, assessed value was $7 billion. And we just got to that spot again 10 years later in 2019. And so you can see each year we've calculated the adjustment, the change. And obviously with the recession, you can see what happened through 2013. But ever since 2013, there hasn't been a negative, hasn't been any loss. But that trend, again, you're looking at 1 to 2% from when that max levy growth quotient has been in the threes and fours. So max levy growth quotient outpacing assessed value, having a little bit of an impact on that tax rate. Then going to slide 17, you can see, really want to draw your attention to the top bars, the kind of hashed bars. That's historical and estimated circuit breaker. You can see circuit breaker has grown since 2012 when it was fully enacted in 2011. And you can see, I guess it's hard to tell, but circuit breaker for 2022 is 2.5 million, and that is projected to increase to 3.4 million by 2025, even though the library is really maintaining that rate really where it's been historically around 21 cents. Thank you for, I know I changed the order a little bit when I was going over this yesterday and this morning, and I just kind of wanted to make sure we talked about other points in different orders. So thanks for following along, but are there any questions? I know that was a lot.
I do have one question on AV. So in 2009, as part of the housing market, the whole thing, AV tanks. I've seen that Policy Analytics did the assumptions moving forward from about this point. What is the confidence level in AV maintaining this target? Because issuing bonds, I mean, we have to have a lot of confidence in this moving forward, or I would think that the board and the administration will want utmost confidence in this AV to be able to accomplish all the things we need to accomplish.
We requested the information back in March and April timeframe, and I just know in conversations with Policy Analytics, I mean, we are conservative by nature, just being honest. So, you know, looking at projections of under 2% for 2023, it could be more. And if it's more, that's great. That's a windfall. I mean, we all know housing prices obviously are a little crazy. So I can't give a confidence level, if that makes sense, since it's a projection, but they do look at parcel by parcel. So I do know it's very vetted. And looking at trend lines, it is just in line with where we've been over the last 5 years.
It seems a lot smoother, and I know from empirical evidence, it's behind market and it's supposed to trend market. And I can tell you the market is absolutely crazy. Wait, not just residential, but commercial. I mean,
Crazy
I mean, crazy and inflated.
So that inflation would drop my confidence level
Other than,
that the
It appears-
assessed value,
it
it
appears-
seems to be overinflated too.
it appears assessed value, from my experience, is below, quite a bit below market,
Okay.
And that is, it's difficult in Indiana.
significantly below market.
Okay.
It is difficult in the sense of, what could I sell this for versus what's it going to be assessed for? That's obviously, there's some disconnect there as well. And with the way that the law is now with trending, the reassessments happen every 4 years, and then there's trending every year in between. And so that's a great question as far as the confidence level. And it is, as you can tell, more of a trend line as opposed to each up, down,
Yeah, but as you clearly pointed out, with a 4-year, it does smooth it out. You miss 1-2 year peaks, and if it's only doing it every 4 years. So,
And if AV, I mean, to the confidence level and knowing what AV is, if it's higher, that's a benefit in the sense that we know the levy can only grow so much. So if AV is higher, that helps with the tax rate, which just helps potentially with circuit breakers.
Man, I don't know if I follow all of it, but here's what I worry about, and just maybe you can tell me if this is something we should worry about or not, is that if something does happen with 2009, maybe even not at that catastrophic kind of level, could this bond issue raise taxes?
Yes, if assessed value.
That's what
if you see
concerns
If you see that 14% dip, if that happens again, then looking at the cash flow, you would be requesting the same dollar amount for the debt service fund. If I could just put you back there on page 13. If the library were to move forward with a bond issuance, that dollar amount is not higher than what it's been. It's not higher than 2.9 million. So in the sense, you'd be asking for the same dollar amount, but if your AV declines, that rate, yes, would increase. But you can't, I would love to be able to control assessed value, but we can control that, how much we asked, if that makes sense. To the best, maybe not perfectly controlled, but to the best of our abilities.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very
You're
much.
thank you.
Lori has my email. If you have any follow-up questions, you're thinking about it tomorrow, next day. Maybe you don't want to think about it again. But, if you have any-
Yeah, don't our kids hurt enough?
Thank you for sticking with me. I know that was a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, any or other board members or staff, any other announcements?
Really quickly before you go, Scott, I missed something in the director's portion, consent portion, is that we also do personnel then. And Charles Sutton was, I don't want to steal your thunder if you were to say something
No,
either.
go ahead.
I just say personally, it has been a pleasure over the course of my time on the board to get to know Charles. We've attended a couple functions, library functions, community functions that the library was at together, got to know him. It has been a joy, and I know the work he's done in the community. So I'm going to miss him. I'm sure the library is going to miss him, and our community is going to miss him. And, I just wanted to have that said. Charles is a fantastic individual.
Rick, I'm glad you brought that up. That was my one announcement. Charles asked that I speak on his behalf tonight. He was gonna come last week. It was his last week here. But if you didn't see it in my portion of the director's report, he wrote a nice little summary. But he wanted to expressly thank the board for the time that you have given and for getting to know many of you in his time here. And just so you know, Charles is gone, but definitely not forgotten. He and I have already been talking today about possible grant opportunities that he will assist us with in his IU work and for EVPL's betterment as well. So he is gone, but definitely not forgotten. but he didn't want to, he actually texted me right before, he said, are you going to the board? Don't forget. I said, I won't forget, Charles. So he wanted me to expressly thank all of you. He is definitely, it was a bittersweet loss.
Yeah.
to-
Yeah, congratulations to him
Yeah,
on the
absolutely.
opportunity, for sure.
Mhm.
Great opportunities, and I think higher ed, I can completely see him being a
Yes,
great
yeah.
fit.
Yeah.
He's
in
promised
higher
me
ed.
he'll send me some great library students and librarians. in the future.
Exactly.
So,
Anything else?
The one thing I just wanted to quickly say before you ask for adjournment is summer reading has been fantastic. Some of the staff has worked really, really hard, everything from back of house marketing, getting everything advertised and all the resources printed up and created with amazing graphic design, to all the staff doing the programs, to programming, outreach, working on making all these things happen. And when I looked earlier in the week, we were over 3,100 people signed up, with over a third completed already. We still have a couple weeks left, so we tend to not get a whole lot more, but this is a big increase over our previous 2 years. We're getting back to where we used to be when it comes to summer reading, and completions are really good for what we're doing. It's definitely more literacy based program, so staff are doing a tremendous job. Programming is great. I mean, we had a music program on the East Lawn that had almost 100 people. And we had another program, Bubble Fest, at the West location that had over 100 people. So they are just doing really well, and outreach has been doing a phenomenal job with their new programs. That Katie came back and talked to you a couple board meetings ago. That's really going gangbusters too. So everyone is really working hard and doing a great job, as they always do.
I think it was Katie that I saw at, and her crew at Music in the Park. That was at Lorraine, were they there? Yep.
Thank you. Anything else to come before the board? If not, we will adjourn this July 21st meeting of the Evansville Public Library Board of Trustees. And Richard, we've got a couple of things for you to
Here.
sign.